Welcome to Ripstop on the Record, the podcast for makers, by makers, where we talk about all things MYOG. Brought to you by Ripstop by the Roll. I think it's good, right?
Yeah, I think that was a good take.
Howdy, everybody. Welcome to episode 106 of Ripstop on the Record. I'm Jameson.
And I'm Avery.
On today's episode, we are talking with Dan McKewen, one of our good friends of the podcast and someone that has been on the episode before. Dan McKewen is a soft goods designer for a company called Priority Designs. But today, we're not talking about soft good design as much as we are talking about building a dream DIY workshop, or just some good updates that you can make to your workshop at home or wherever it is you're making. This is a really fun episode because the catch is we need to come up with two different workshop spaces. So this was a prompt that somebody sent in a really long time ago. They asked, if I had $1,000, what equipment would you recommend that I buy? So we sort of answer the budget side of the question, which is, what would you want to upgrade to, or what are some things that are necessities for people that are working in their living room or just an extra space in their house if they need to build out a little bit of a workshop, and then all the way up to maybe the dream zone, or if you're looking to go into more production side, what sort of fun equipment and helpful things you would want to have in your workshop. So we talk about it all. Dan's really experienced in the matter. He's run his own company. He's been in sew shops. He's now a soft good designer. He has a whole makerspace at home. He knows it from every angle. So he's a great person to have on. So it's fun to talk to him. Before we get on to the episode, though, on a much more serious note, on Friday, September 27th, and through that weekend, Hurricane Helene came through the southern United States and absolutely devastated a large amount of areas. The hurricane hit Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Now, as a North Carolina-based company, we have a lot of really strong connections to Western North Carolina, including some of our own employees and really great friends, partners of the company, and customers of ours live out there. With that being the case, we feel really strongly and really sad about some of the devastation that's happening out there. And as a company, we're doing some things to help send some relief out there and be supportive. Personally, we've talked about it a lot, what we're doing kind of individually. We just wanted to put it out there to people that are listening. Please be aware of the devastation that's happening. And if you're able, and if you have the capability to provide support in any way, whether that is monetary, time, energy, whatever you can give, that would be fantastic. This is a really, really cool area of the country, and there's a lot of people that have been very deeply affected. Unlike some other parts of the country, where no matter where a hurricane happens, it's pretty devastating, but especially in an area that is not familiar or not built to withstand hurricane-like winds and rains, it was particularly devastating. So if you would think about that, we would really appreciate it, and we know the people out there would as well.
Thanks, Jameson. On another note, we have some new products to talk about today. We have brought on new colors of Gutermann Mara 70 and Gutermann Mara 100. We brought on lots of new colors of the 100, and the colors we brought on are made to match our specific fabrics and components, so you'll get a perfect match every time. We also brought on some permacore thread cones as well, so check that out under the new tab on our website.
Yeah, and if you're in the budget for a new shelter, we have kind of a new shelter material as well. So for the last several years, we've had the 1/1 Sil Poly XL. That's kind of a classic, but there were some problems with that material, really just complaints that we wanted to get right. So we're taking what is most likely the top seller of shelter materials, and we're making it even better. So everybody welcome 1/1 Sil Poly XL 2nd Gen. This is now lighter, it's been revamped, it has the professional finishing techniques that you're used to. So where before the 1/1 weighed in at maybe like 1.7 ounces, I think this one's weighing in at just 1.3 with the coating. So this is an awesome material, comes in new colors as well. Just imagine the same material before, but just a little bit better, including lighter. So go check that out as well. Now, one other thing that we didn't mention in the last podcast with Martin, we talked about how to make a quilt. There's a one-pager to follow up that episode. So if you want to kind of see everything visually or have a PDF download, a free PDF download I might add, for everything we talked about in the episode, then that is linked in the podcast description. So there's a PDF download right there. So that way you can have that, and that kind of gives you a list of the materials you can choose, the installation pieces you can choose, the components you might need, gives you a little bit of a breakdown all in one place for what you want to do if you might want to make your own quilt.
And lastly, don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe on the listening platform that you use. And as always, you can head on over to YouTube where you can watch this episode. And don't forget to subscribe to us there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get on to the podcast. Hey, Dan, welcome back to the podcast.
How's it going?
It's going great. So, for everyone listening, if Dan's name or voice sound familiar, then you'd be right, because he was on episode 86. We were just chatting about this before we click record, and I don't think any of us can really. It doesn't feel like it's been 9 or 10 months since we last chatted. But Dan, how are you, and how have the last 9 or 10 months been for you?
Awesome. I mean, they've flown by. That's probably the look of shock on my face when I realize it's been that long. But yeah, I'm kind of like, man, what do I have to show for this year?
I know. Yes, similarly feel.
Yeah.
The last episode we had with you, we talked about what we titled the MYOGer's dream job, or for you, your day job. So what it's like being a soft goods designer. And that's not what we're talking about today directly. But besides being a great guest, you have a lot of experience with machines and shops and stuff like that. And that's kind of what we're going to get into. So you excited to get into it today?
Oh, I'm stoked. Yeah, having been on a lot of different, sides, the manufacturing side, the small shop side, the design consulting side. There's just so many different things that like ways that you can set your shop up, how you can organize stuff to really set yourself up for, okay, I know that I might want to make a jump. I'm right here right now, but making stuff for myself and some of my friends, I might want to make a jump to, making multiple items and stocking things or running an online website, or maybe I'm already doing that and I need to figure out, like, I'm teetering at that point where can I actually make this a job? And a lot of this, the success comes down with how you set your space up and what tools you have. And I think a lot of this too, it's like I've made every possible single mistake you can make. So if I can just save one person one mistake, this is totally worth the hour.
Absolutely. And just to remind everyone what we're doing here in this episode, we're going to be nailing down different points for each topic, going over different categories, sewing machines, furniture, tools, materials, and components, and some miscellaneous. The goal with this being that you can dream about your space, what you would want if you hit the lottery, but also trying to give you some tangible advice if you're looking to upgrade your space. So let's get into it.
Awesome.
The first most important thing we're going to start with is sewing machines, the thing that we're talking about and the thing that we need in our space to make our gear goals happen. What type of machines would you put in a DIY workshop, Dan?
All right. So yeah, I think from the onset, identifying what type of maker you are is important, and what type of product you're going to be making. So for myself, I guess like a little bit of my background. I had a backpack company. It was in the cycling space, outdoor space. We had a production studio. We did some contract manufacturing, some different white label projects, as well as our own brand, and then stepped into consulting, manufacturing consulting, and then ended up here at Priority Designs and do a lot of prototyping, design development. So throughout this process, it's like we've had a shop of 15 people. I've had a shop of 2 people. I've had my own personal space. We have this space here, which is really unique. So kind of figuring out what type of maker you are, first off, what size you are is going to be important kind of through the rest of the episode. So I thought about it in 3 tiers, right? So if you have the hobbyist, right? Like you just like to make stuff for your trips, little things that you need. Maybe you have some ideas, to make, camp kitchen organizer. That's something I made for myself recently. It was like, I need this Rubbermaid tote sucks. I need something that's better than that. So there's a hobbyist. And then there's like the micro maker. Like I think of a friend of mine, he makes really small little ultralight pouches and he sells them, through like a Reddit platform, right? Just he'll make them whenever he can. and he'll just put a few up for sale. And then there's like, the step above that would be like the side hustle where, hey, I'm bringing in some decent revenue. I got to think about how to optimize my space and my processes. This is taking a decent chunk of my time. So those three levels are important to kind of know like where you're at now and where you want to go. So I guess, the question for like the DIYer is if you know that you are so like squarely in the ultralight space and that's what you're passionate about, you're going to have a different machine for that. You're going to have a lightweight machine. You might want to have a machine that has a few more options in it. So, you can toggle between a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch, or it has the ability to set up as a double needle machine or a single needle machine, right? So you might be able to take that route because those materials are a little bit less hard on your machine. And if you're not like, when we were in full scale production, we were, 50 hours on one machine a week, it's like, that's just going to blast that machine. So a lighter weight machine or a home machine, domestic machine might not really suit for that. If you're going to be, doing a little bit more, typically what I like to tell people is if you want to set yourself up for being able just to go into your shop, make something and have it be versatile, it's really good to target a medium weight machine. So like I personally, I'm a huge fan of Juki's. I've used just about every kind of machine that you can use for straight stitch, and they're just the most dependable machine you can get. Typically, you want to look for as many metal components as possible. They're gonna be a little bit more fine-tuned. They're gonna last a little bit longer. But a medium weight, if I just had to pick one kind of machine for a hobbyist, I really like going with an industrial machine if you can. So typically, in that context, a medium weight machine, you're going to have a little bit more variation on either side. The industrial machines tend to be a little bit more powerful. You can also set them up to handle a little bit lighter weight material if you need to by decreasing the needle size and the thread size and all that normal stuff. But, a lot of people don't have that kind of space, or, they have that multifunctional space, so you need to like kind of, am I going to have a dedicated sewing table, or do I need something that's movable? That's a huge question to ask. If you're going to be mostly using like wovens, for gear, bags, pouches, stuff like that, you can just do so much with a straight stitch, just a standard straight stitch machine. So I would put my money into like one workhorse like that first. If I know that I'm going to like maybe be doing just kind of like following wherever my heart leads me in terms of making gear, right? And that could be apparel, that could be, any type of knits or anything like that. It'd be good if you had, let's see, I wrote this down. A straight stitch machine that's going to be your kind of daily driver is great. A serger is key if you're going to be working with knits. You need that. You just can't, you can't replace it. Your projects are going to be stunted. They're going to be weird if you don't have that. So even just with those two, that opens up almost everything. Now you can get very far down. So like here, for instance, we work on so many different types of projects. We have about 15 different machines, and one of them, the only job, it's a cover stitch machine that trims the extra material off the backside, and it's designed only for putting a stretch waistband onto a stretch fabric. Okay, now that machine sits there untouched, covered, or maybe it's uncovered now. I think it might be uncovered. I need to do that. It just sits there 90% of the time. But when you need it, it is the perfect tool for the job. So that's that consideration. Like if you're in that side hustle space, I have a perfect example of this. I used to do all of our like box X stitches. We just did them all by hand. We just got used to it, and we just did them all like that. Now, it's like the frog slowly cooking in the water doesn't realize it, right? It's like when we were at full scale production, it's like, oh my God, a bar tacker would have done that job super quick, repeat it the same every time, right? So it's really where you're at and what you're willing to put into it. If you have the space, if you have the money to have a piece of equipment that sits there that only gets one, it does one thing but does it really well, that's awesome. A lot of us don't have that. Like my current setup right now, I call it the soul hole. It's in my basement, and it's just one pretty heavy duty machine. It's a straight stitch Juki. It's a 1541. The thing can sew through a 2x4. It's awesome. It's not great for super lightweight stuff, but most of the time I don't go like, I'm not making ultralight gear, so it works.
If you broke the categories down for us by hobbyist, micro maker, and side hustle, do you have any go-to machines for those categories?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just a huge any Juki anything is really good. Particularly if there's some question about it. The older Jukis in particular are really nice. If you find one that is like a green color, like the head is like that kind of, I don't even know what to call it. Like it's not emerald green, but it's kind of this like gray green. Those are great machines. They were made in a certain period in Japan. They were all very highly, crafted, and they will last forever. So, depending, one that we use here a lot for almost every project, it's the Juki, it's the DDL 5550N-7. Here's the
They really make it
problem.
easy with the names, don't they?
I know. That's the problem. A lot of these machines, they have, there's a general family number that is, here's the type of machine, and all those additional things they might tell you that, okay, it has a computer on it, or it has an automatic thread trimmer, or needle, like computerized needle placement, like all that stuff. That's what those numbers can mean. But that would be, I would say, almost across the board, that one is awesome. Another one that I've heard great stuff about, I haven't used, are the tabletop machines from Sailrite. I haven't used one of those, but I know friends that have them, and they think that they're great. Almost more than the specific type of machine, I would say, is learning first how to work on your machine. Like, most of your projects are going to stall out because your machine goes down, and knowing how to quickly diagnose the problem, knowing how to fix it, that's going to save you so much time and money, and you can make even a non-ideal sewing machine work pretty great for you if you know how to work on it.
Yeah, I think knowing how to work on it and use your machine correctly. I mean, it's all about reverse reverse problem solving most of the time. So trying to figure out, why certain stitches are doing that. But I know that those heavy duty machines also require a little bit more care and attention. And just going back to the all metal versus plastic, there's a reason we see a lot of older vintage machines that are still able to work because they were all metal versus a plastic machine that's going to end up
Yeah,
in a thrift store.
right, right. Yeah, I've had more problems with, I have a small machine just for real lightweight stuff. It's just a little tabletop thing. I think I bought it on like Marketplace for like $50, and I have had more problems with that thing than any production piece of equipment I've ever had. So it's like, now it's not a good quality, but it's like, that's the way it is, right? It's like, if you can find, a good vintage machine that's cheap, get it serviced once maybe, and then just do a bunch of research on YouTube on how to work on it and fix it, you're going to just save yourself so much time. So much time.
A couple episodes ago, I think they all do somewhat blend together, but a couple
Yeah.
episodes ago we talked about kind of like the startup checklist, and I feel like with sewing machines especially, they're really simple machines, but there are so many simple things that it's so easy to get lost. I can't tell you how many times over the years I've been sewing, and like I just go to Carter's office, I'm like, man, this stupid thing won't work, and like it's nesting, and I'll walk by and he's just like, yeah, the needle's on backwards, and I'm like, I knew that, but I just totally didn't know that in the moment.
Yeah.
And I don't know what
Oh
it is
yeah.
about a sewing machine, but there's like 97 little steps that are not complex. If you saw them independently, fresh eyes, you're good to go. But like in the moment, you just can't see that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like, honestly, like, I have a little like mental list. I'm like, check the thread, check to make sure it's threaded right, check the needle, check the hook, check the bobbin. It's like, I mean, you go down through each one, and usually, if you have that kind of like cataloged in there, you find it pretty quick. Every now and then you get some problem
Yeah.
that's just horrendous, but it's what it is.
Yeah. So I really like the tiers that you have. And the next question I want to ask is kind of for each tier. But let's start with like the hobbyist at home maker. So say this is somebody that's making a variety of items from some ultralight stuff to some EDC stuff. Just they're making kind of as their feelings lead, let's say. What's kind of the dream machine setup? So let's say they have like a Singer heavy duty, they have some at home machine that's kind of is the Swiss Army knife, and they're looking at getting a second machine. What would you say is that perfect, well, maybe not perfect, that's the wrong word, like the next best kind of second machine to get? Would it be in the industrial, or would it be like a more like one of those like Juki tabletops, Sailrite tabletops, where it's going to be still kind of a Swiss Army knife, just like elevated in all its abilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that really, it's like there's kind of a convergence here where some machines do a lot of things. Like you can set them up to do zigzag,
Yeah.
you can set them up to do different patterns. Those can be super handy. Doing like adjusting the timing on those can be really difficult. And a lot of times you can be like, they don't quite follow through on the promises, because you spend a
Yeah.
lot of time messing with them. I mean, I would definitely, if I had to do a top three, yeah, it would be like heavyweight machine, a medium light machine, and a serger. And then the next thing I would put on there is a bar tacker.
Yeah.
They're just cool. They're like, if you have anything that requires, a grab handle or even just finishing strap ends and stuff, it just looks way better. It's easier. It's, and they're just cool. So
That is,
yeah,
that's a machine I've always wanted to play with, I guess. And there's a like, I don't know, it's they're everywhere. Like if you look at production gear, you're like you see a bar tack and as an at-home maker, you're like, oh, that's the thing I can't do. It's like that. Like I don't know, it's a thing
yeah,
you're always reaching for, you can't create. But then also, just like hearing other people talk about them, they're like, yeah, they are pretty nice, but also they are the most annoying machine I own. Out of all the
yeah.
machines, that's the one that's the most just like gives
Oh,
me the most trouble.
yeah. They're loud and they're violent, and like,
Yeah,
and the people a lot of times too. There's a debate going on whether a bar tack is actually better in places or not, or if it's actually more
yeah,
damaging to the material or the webbing. But definitely, when you get to okay, so that's what I would say for that. Like definitely heavy duty, medium lightweight machine and a serger. You're going to be like well down your way to being able to make most of the stuff that you need to make or want to make.
I like this framework as well, just because I don't often hear people talk about like a heavy duty to lightweight machine, but it makes a lot of sense, especially for what you're working on. Like if you're making tactical and EDC stuff, then you're going to probably want like that heavy duty machine, and then like a zigzag for stretch stuff or a surge or something else. But that makes a lot of sense to think about it more so like the application first of what you're doing. There's probably not going to be like these machines that perfectly fit into these
Right.
silos for everybody.
Right. And at each kind of one of those tiers, or like jumping from one tier to the next, it's like you might be looking at different machines or a different way to cut out your material or handle your material, and it's all just about efficiency and repeatability, right? So it's like you might get to the point where it's like, okay, it might make it 1%, 2% faster for me to do this step if I had a different machine, but like, is that really worth it? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
does what I have, does it do what it's supposed to do, and in reasonable fashion? And if yes, it's like great. I mean, you can get so far with a single straight stitch machine that's tuned for the type of material that you're building with. I mean, it really, like with swing arm like binder feeders and stuff, it's like you can do so much just on one machine. So even though it's like it's cool and it's nice to have a bunch of different equipment that does really specialized stuff, it's not necessary.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you maybe an impossible question, and one that we've sort of asked here and there on episodes before. But there's a lot of makers that we chat with and that buy material from us that are in multi-use spaces, whether it's dining rooms, basements, extra bedrooms. We've seen people send in photos of sewing in their vans, their trucks. Super cool photos, by the way. Awesome
Yeah.
multi-use spaces, but they're multi-use spaces and they are super crammed. Is it like, is it that all metal kind of vintage machine that you would say is probably the best one size fits all for like the person that wants to sew in these really tight spaces?
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes it's just you're not able to have like an industrial machine, so it's like something
Yeah.
that is small that you can easily, you know, put put up and then stow underneath or wherever. It's like that can be like you can do so much on those machines too. Like the first sewing machine that I built so many bags on was just an old Singer, and it was like one of the foldaway ones that folded into a tabletop.
Yeah,
Right, this thing
yeah.
was from like the 50s. You can do so much there. It's just really about picking the right one for the type of material that you think you're going to use the most. That can be hard because every now and then someone might, hey, can you make this out of wax canvas for me? And you might be really pushing your lightweight machine, and it might not always be appropriate to take on stuff like that. But I generally find that like a medium weight machine, you can do some heavier stuff on it. Whereas like if you have a heavy duty machine, it's really hard to go backwards and do really lightweight material on it. I mean, it will just chew it up, especially if you have a walking foot machine. It will just like, it's just not made for it. And it's a little bit easier to kind of go the other way. If you have a machine that's a little bit more dialed for, medium to lightweight, you can usually sew some thicker stuff, even up to like, 500D, 1000D with some webbing in it. Like you might have some fits with it, but it works. But it's hard to go the other way.
That was my next question is would a medium weight machine be kind of right in that sweet spot of like you can do some lighter stuff as long as you get your dials right, and you can do some heavier stuff, you get your dials right, but you can't with the lighter and the heavier machines, you can't go either, like you can't go to the extremes at all. Would that be right?
Yeah. That
Okay.
that would definitely be right. It's really hard if you go to one of those extremes to get it to do something outside of that. I mean, because some of the machines they're so. We have a console back here, and it's mostly made for upholstery, and the needle is like this. It's like this thick, and it's like it only uses like the lowest it can use is like T135 thread. It's crazy.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it's like that. Like you don't want that. Like that machine will
Yeah.
not do anything below like leather and really thick material, canvases, heavy canvases and stuff. Medium weight is a great way to go.
Are there like lightweight, medium, heavyweight sergers as well, or are those kind of in a closer weight category where they're all sort of doing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different types of sergers, and usually it comes down to how many needles, and or sorry, how many threads they have, and kind of how they're set up. So that can affect the gauge of the stitch. Generally, I'd say for most of the stuff that we've worked on here, which is a really wide range, if we're using the serger, it's usually with thinner material. It just kind of usually works that way. So, and there have been times when we have an awesome Juki serger here. It's like amazing, but it breaks every now and then. If we don't have time, we just have a backup like home serger, and it's
Hmm.
great. Like
Okay.
it does the job, and it has a lot of flexibility in it with how you can thread it and unthread certain needles, and you can change the width of the gauge of the serge and stuff. So yes, to like answer your question, yeah, a lot of it is how you set them up. So a lot of the sergers and those types of machines are really configurable. Um, it's just kind of how you want to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that is reassuring and makes a lot of sense that um, kind of like your general at-home serger will really get that job done because I think for a lot of makers getting a serger is extremely tempting because we want to get into apparel to some extent. But then it's like this whole other sewing machine world that doesn't exactly correlate to the normal sewing machine world that we already know or know a little bit
Yeah.
about. And it becomes like twice as overwhelming. So I guess that's reassuring to me, at least, to know like, okay, like your general at home sergers will kind of get a lot of the stuff done, which I guess now that I think about it, even in my own experience here in our shop, I've made like sleeping bag liners, Alpha Direct hoodies, wind shells, beanies, mittens, blankets, like all with the same
Yeah.
serger. So I suppose that's kind of the point. It can do everything.
Right, right. And it's like, honestly, too, like most of it is the length of time that you're going to be on a machine. Like you really start to get hit the upper limit of what a home machine can do when you're just putting the work in on it and like
Yeah.
sewing a lot. Um, that's when you really start to see the difference between industrial machines and home machines. So if you're really like, if you're ramping up real big for, let's say you're making a run of pouches for something or an event or a group of friends or something, it's like that might be the time to start thinking about like, okay, this is the third round of, batches of stuff that I've done. I need to start thinking about maybe stepping up a little bit and getting to, an industrial piece of equipment that might be a little bit more robust, a little bit more consistent, less problems.
That makes sense. So we might come back. Well, we will come back to sewing machines a little bit here and there, but I'm going to move us on kind of to the next topic, which is furniture. So no matter where you are, you got to figure out where to place your machine and where you're going to sit, and then how you're going to cut your stuff, and all those things take furniture of some sort, whether it's tables, chairs, etc. So let's talk about that. For the at-home maker, where they're going to have a tabletop machine of some sort. What's the best table in your opinion, or what are some things that people should look for when getting their sewing table?
Oh, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because I feel like I'm a broken record when it comes to like if they ask us like, well, what do you guys need? And I'm like, table space.
Yeah.
Table space. We need more table space. And it's particularly, you need a table that is as wide as a roll of material. So even though you might get material that comes folded, you really need to be able to lay that out fully. So that's, most materials are 60 inches wide. So enough table space where you can fully lay that out is super, super important. Because what that allows you to do then, especially if you're working on larger stuff, from experience, there was a point where I used to have to go out onto my like front porch roof and roll materials out and then cut stuff because it was like the only large area that I could roll materials out on.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable. And there's all kinds of obvious problems with that, but table space is super key. Now, if I have enough space, what I like to do is have my main cutting table, which, is at least wide enough for a roll of material, and then another maybe, 12 inches on the side for pencils, pens, scissors, all that little stuff. And then immediately behind me, it could even be a small folding table or something that I can put things that are already cut on. I'm really particular about if you start off making something and it's wrong when you start, you're going to be chasing that problem around the entire time. So it comes down to, being able to fully lay everything out, get all your pattern pieces out there. You can see that you've cut everything out, the right way. And then your staging space behind you, then it provides you the opportunity to lay out the different steps in the order that you're going to do them. I can't tell you how many times I did this recently. I didn't lay them out in order. And I got to the end and I'm like, what is this? And it was like it was like a side pocket that I was like, it was really important for the function of this thing. And I was like, oh God, how many times? So having like a main cut area, a place where you can stage this stuff, especially if you're working in multiples, that is key. Like if you're doing a batch of 5 or 10 of something, being able to stage everything out is awesome. And then I like to either have my table really close, or my sewing table really close to that, like in a little U shape, or right next to it, or to either have that or you have doubles of everything, meaning you have double scissors, double snips, double pens, double whatever it is you're using. One set that lives on your sewing machine and one set that lives on your table, because you'll spend half your time walking around like, where did I put my scissors? You get something and you're holding it together and you're like all ready to sew it and make this cool thing, and then you sit down and you're like where's this thing? And you have to put it down and then go to get, find it. And it's like it's a whole thing. But being able to, I really like chairs that swivel. So the way that I've got my home studio set up is my chair basically I've got my sewing table, and then I have right behind me is my cutting table, and I made it long enough so I kind of have the staging area on one side of it. I mean, it's basically a 4x10 table with all my fabric storage under it. So all my fabric, and there's like foam and stuff like that, is all stored under it. And then my chair just swivels around, and it's on wheels. That can be nice for kind of scooting around if you need to. Wheels are funny. You have to clean your floors a lot if you have casters, because the threads just like get in there and
Yeah.
just break them. But it's that can really, like, at least for me, that type of efficiency takes a project from like, oh, this is like a 1 evening or a 2 evening project into like a week. You know, it just you just get, it's like death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's like, oh, I gotta walk over here to get my scissors. Okay, I got them. Oh God, I forgot the clips. I gotta walk over here and get the clips. Okay, and then it's like you sew something on backwards because you didn't have everything laid out the right way. It's like, it just is, it can, to me, that makes it more fun to make because it feels more almost like free flowing. Like I'm just sewing, I'm just grabbing stuff, I'm sewing, everything's right here where I need it, and you kind of get in that flow state.
Yeah, those are some really good tips. I love the laying everything out in order that you need to do it. I know so many times it's trying to find that pattern piece, especially if you're like not cutting everything in one day and then you put things together and then you're trying to match the pattern pieces back up and you're like, what is this square, and keeping everything together. So I love the idea of that. You made me think of there should be like a system. I've A lot of people might know what I'm talking about, like an art drying rack where you have those little slots. That would be really cool. But then you just like, you could go down and put other pattern pieces. Yeah, I really,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if there's a really complicated thing that I'm trying to make, I'll stop right at the front end and write out the steps just quickly in Word. Okay, then this pocket goes onto this thing goes onto this thing. This, it's like, because
yeah.
it's a lot harder to figure that out when you're sitting there staring at a pile of rectangles and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? But like taking 10 or 15 minutes before you start and laying that out, like that saved my ass so many times. Because I'll just be making stuff and I'll be listening to music and not paying attention. And then like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
wait. Yeah.
It's hard to keep up with. Do you have any tips for storing patterns? I know that it's one of my pain points. I know it's one of Jameson's pain points. It's Mine ended up like folded kind of all over the place. I have like some on top of a cabinet, some in a cabinet, some with my sewing stuff, and it's just so hard to figure out like how to have space or how to store them properly if you have less
Yeah.
space than normal.
Yeah. That, no, that's challenging. And I think it does come back to those 3 tiers, right? So if you're a hobbyist and I know that I'm just going to make one of these, like I'm not going to be making these ever again, or if I need to, I can go figure out how to do it again. Sometimes I'll take the material, I'll flip it on the backside, and I'll just pattern draft on it, like just with a pencil, and then it's like, then I don't have to worry about needing anything. If I'm making multiples, yeah, paper patterns are great. I normally don't like to roll them up. It's the best way to store them, but then using them again is such a pain because then you have like, a day early before you even start, you have to come and roll them out and put weights on it. It's super annoying. But and then if you're going to be doing multiples, or like, hey, I kind of think I want to keep making this product, just go digital. Like, take the time to figure out how to, pattern in Illustrator. I mean, there's specific patterning software, but it's expensive. But going digital, what that allows you to do is you can print stuff out, and then when you're done with it, you don't have to have it on, there. Like you can print it out again if you want to. One thing that's really nice if you know that you're making multiples is, taking, maybe you have one flagship product that, and you're like, God, I just make a ton of these things. Go to, if there's a plastics manufacturer near you, and just have them either laser cut or, water jet some plastic templates for you. Or if you have woodworking equipment, just go to a place and get, quarter-inch, eighth-inch thick piece of styrene or something, and spend the time to make plastic patterns. They don't wear down, they don't fold, they don't, and they can stay flat, and you can just shove them, next to your machine. Or I've even seen people have a little flat, like underneath their big cutting surface, they just have a little flat, little almost pocket where or like a little drawer where they can put patterns.
That's a good idea to turn them into something that is more structured than paper. I hadn't really thought about that, but for people that haven't worked a ton with reusing patterns, paper works. And I'll kind of tell you what we do with our paper patterns here, but you do have to be extremely careful with them, and eventually you get like 10,000 marker drawings on them and stuff, and they get wet if you accidentally pour your beverage on them, or they get wrinkled or ripped. And
Yeah.
so that's a good point. You open up your options for storing your patterns if there's something that can't fold, roll, get ripped, something like that. That's a great point. But so for what we do in our shop here, because we have a lot of paper patterns, there are some that are on rolls. Like for people listening, to learn MYOG patterns that we have, before I cut them out, those are on rolls, because before we sell them to you guys, we have to print them out and look at them and really study them. So we have like one of every pattern set out and kind of in the side of the room. And then the patterns that I have made, or Carter's made, or Isaac had made, when those are cut out, we paid too much money. But on Uline, you can get these like flat pattern drawers. They're metal. They're foolishly expensive for what they are. I mean, I want to say they're like $800 per thing, but they're these massive, like 36 by 36 metal drawers that are like 2 inches deep, maybe, or thick, and they're massive. But you can lay out a whole, Alpha Direct hoodie pattern in that drawer. So all of ours are kind of all of my patterns are made like, the random grocery bags, and for my half frame bag for my bike, and like all those random patterns, all of those are stored laying flat in there. And then what I've done for patterns that have more than one piece, I'll write like the pattern name, half frame bag for my gravel bike versus my beer bike. For my gravel bike, it's one of three, so I know like, oh, there's the the zipper gussets in here somewhere, I don't need to find that. That's a decent naming system that I've found, but it is totally a pain, because now I do have like 15 patterns in there. There's only 10 drawers. Like there are multiple patterns in every single drawer.
Yeah. I definitely, I use an alligator clip for paper patterns that I have to keep.
Yeah.
I'll just clip them all together. And sometimes too, you can, if the panels are really big. So like I had to make a cover for a vehicle, and this pattern pieces were huge. I mean, like comically huge. But you can make any of your pattern pieces like on the half, right? Like you can cut them in half, and as long as you write down that, hey, this piece gets mirrored over when I actually make it, you can cut down a lot of space by just doing that.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Something else that takes up a lot of space is fabric. And that's something that, even though we have a lot of space here in our makers in our shop, that I still struggle with effectively storing fabric. I guess I have a couple questions. Like, how do you do it at Priority Designs? How do you do it at home? And do you have tips for people that have in an even smaller space to store all their materials?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, if you can roll your material, it keeps the quality a lot better than storing stuff folded. But here we have a couple like wall mounted like racks where we can pull down some material. That's for the stuff that we use all the time. But then we have a big loft that's above a lot of our specialty machines. And so we store those, and they're almost like bays. So you think of like, Lowe's or something, where they're like bays of things. So there's a whole bay this is all like stretched lycra materials. Here's a whole bay of, coated vinyls and TPU materials. Here's a whole bay of, laminate material. So it's all like but everything is stored horizontally, and it just takes up so much space. I would definitely look at, like, if you're in a basement or something, or in a garage, look at the space that's above your cutting table. So if you think about it, if you have a big cut table, which I think is like probably the central piece of equipment to have, the back of your cutting table, like you're going to be leaned over that. And so there's all this space up in that back corner that you can use to store materials and stuff long ways, right? And then underneath your cutting table, there's so much space that's available.
I was also going to add for myself clear bins. I don't have room to like roll my fabric, but I love a clear bin. You can see exactly what's in it, and that also helps a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's great.
Next we're gonna get into tools that people can use while they're sewing, which is another fun category. Lots of opinionated questions here. So let's start first with what tools are absolutely needed, and then what things are just nice to have.
That's good. Okay. I broke this down into 3 sections. There's
Ooh,
measuring,
yes.
there's marking, and there's cutting. So for measuring, um, I'm very weird about the measuring stuff. I have a couple tools. I have a lot of different measuring options. So typically, what I like to have like next to my table, um, obviously a measuring tape that can be just super handy for just wrapping around stuff and getting quick measurements. Obviously, it's terrible for trying to draw a line with, so that doesn't an L square, a smaller L square or something, even just the 12 by 8 one. I use that all the time. The 24-inch cork backed ruler is the best ruler ever, and I will fight anyone about that. So what's awesome about, especially with synthetic materials, is they can be really slippery. So having a cork backed ruler, it just gives you just enough grip on the material so it doesn't move around if you're trying to just draw a straight line on the material directly. I usually like to have a 36-inch T-square that I can just lay down. That's nice for some of the longer stuff. Then I also have a 46 or 48-inch. It's a drywall ruler, and here's why that's awesome. So if you build your table off of, like, let's say a 4x8 sheet of plywood, you can use one side of it to kind of like line your material up. And if like I have to do like, let's say you're doing a big duffel bag, like a gusset piece on a duffel bag can be really long. So being able to just slap that 48-inch ruler across there and have it almost get all the way across that material at a perfect 90-degree angle, that's going to be huge. It's going to save you so much time. But one of my favorite ones, and this is especially true if you're doing a lot of the drafting on the fabric, but even if you're just hand drafting on the paper first, it's like a center line symmetrical ruler. I don't know if you've seen these, but they're 24, 28 inches, and the center is 0, and then it's symmetrical, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
So when you're drafting, it's like you're always kind of using the center first, and it just takes a lot of the guesswork out, or a lot of the math, which I'm terrible at math, so I need some hand holding there. That piece of measuring equipment is awesome. And then a little just a plastic circle template for doing radius corners, super handy. You just know it's going to be the same on every corner that you do.
Dan, I feel like I can see into your life right now, which is you and I like go to Lowe's for like home projects, but also like we're always scouting out like, is that ruler big enough to fit on my cutting table?
Yeah.
Like I'm always at Lowe's and like
dude.
Ace Hardware being like, what can I bring into the sew shop next?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I saw someone that had an 8-foot T-square, and I was like, where'd you get that? It's like I don't know if I actually need this, but it's really cool. But if you're making smaller stuff, like you might not need that at all. I do find it nice when you're laying out like multiple items, like let's say you're doing a bunch of pouches, to just plop that big ruler. I know I've got a straight plumb line that's in line with the grain of the material, and just do a real light line there. That way, when I'm like laying my patterns across to cut, a bunch all at once, I know that they're not going to kind of like, sometimes if you're laying them out, they shift as you go. And then you get to the last one and you're like, ooh, that's not, very lined up. But having something like that's really helpful. And then marking is pretty simple. Like I usually have a white colored pencil that I do most of. It's you find the softest colored pencil you can. That's super helpful. And then like a black Sharpie is good, a thinner Sharpie. And I also like I use just a regular Bic like ballpoint pen a lot. You know the ink doesn't kind of leak out as easily. It's not as like heavy handed as a Sharpie. I mean, silver pointed Sharpies can be great. I use chalk every now and then, but I find that kind of frustrating because it comes off sometimes when you don't want it to. So that's that. And then cutting, I prefer scissors. I know that's like I'm walking into some controversial territory. I do use a rotary cutter all the time, especially on knit materials. It's impossible to cut knit materials with scissors. It's so hard. So I really only have for cutting stuff. I have scissors. I've got a rotary cutter, and then I have some fabric weights and they're just like big, enormous washers that got at the hardware store. We just pop those down on the pattern pieces, and keep everything just under a little bit of tension. It's nice.
Nice. Thanks for sharing the tools and breaking it down for us. Let's talk about something that might be a little more fun. Are there any non-traditional tools that you use, and what are they?
Yes. There's a few. So I tend to like a straight razor blade over a seam ripper. I really don't use seam rippers that much. I do on knit materials, but on a lot of woven materials, you can get, if you have your seam laying pretty flat, it's really easy to get your blade in there and just run it really kind of carefully right in that seam. Now, that freaks some people out that I work with. They don't do that. That's a preference thing. I use a good thing to have on hand is just some like Super 77, like spray adhesive. It's real low tack. And if I'm putting on a piece of Velcro or something that is in the middle of a panel of fabric, it is so nice just to hit it real light, a light dusting, stick it on there, and it's not going to move. Because like, when you're sewing stuff like that, they have a tendency to kind of go like this, and then you get done and you're like, why does that look like that? It's like because you're kind of pushing it as you're sewing. That's super handy. Really thin double stick tape is also amazing. There's some, like, I think you can get them on Uline. There's a lot of different places you can get it, but just, we have some like 1/4 inch double stick tape. We use that a lot for like folding stuff over and making sure things kind of stay consistent. And then, this is really good. I brought it. Okay.
What in the world?
Yeah. This is one of the most hilariously ridiculous things that I found. But if you use a lot of tape for building like paper models and stuff, what you do, or even if you're using it for taping pattern pieces together, you load up a roll of tape in here, and as you spin this wheel, there's still some tape in there. So it feeds the tape and cuts it into perfect little shapes.
Whoa.
So it's awesome because you can roll this out and then you have like 8 pieces of tape just like right there that you can just like quickly grab. And so you don't have to like stop and then, because what it's, if you're trying to build a model and you're trying to hold it together and then you're trying to like use one hand to get the tape off, this thing is awesome. It's hilarious. But that's my secret piece of equipment.
What is that thing, or how'd you find that?
I just found it on Amazon. I have no idea what it's called. I could dig it up. Again, that's the thing where it's like this sits there, 90% of the time. When you need it, it's like the most incredible tool. Yeah.
It's like trying to think of what to tell the listener to look at on YouTube. Like look at masking tape, pre-cut masking tape roller thing.
Yeah. I'm gonna see if I can find it again.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That's a hot pick though. I like that. I'm not to work backwards too much, but I'm still kind of enamored by the whole razor blade seam thing. I want to try that really badly now too.
Yeah, it takes, and what's funny about it is usually like after a little bit of time that the blade kind of dulls a little bit and then it's better. So there's less risk of, it cutting something. If you just search Scotch tape cutter, it comes up on Amazon or something. You can find it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we'll link that in the description for everybody.
And it's
Um,
definitely not a need. This is a want, and it's weird, and it takes up probably way too much space than what it's worth. But
but it's special, and I like that.
yeah, that's right.
A quick tip that I would recommend for people: we have like this massive roll of paper that I use for all of my patterning. Um, because we do dye sublimation here, paper is obviously a part of that process. So it's, I think, 24 inches wide, and I have no idea how long. I've been using it for like 2 years now. Enormous. And that's what I do my patterning on. I have I've labeled, like, put like with tape and Sharpie, a pair of scissors that's just for paper. And then we have these magnet bars at each sewing machine. So there's like a magnet bar at our serger, a magnet bar at the industrial, or both industrials, and a magnet bar on the cutting table, where there's scissors, thread snips, a lighter, the basic tools everywhere. But at the cutting table, there's one pair of scissors just for paper, so that I know. And then I also label all of our other scissors when I put them in the maker space, because they get really, really tired. Like, if you, especially for us, when you're cutting ultra or something with UHMWPE, like these really, really abrasion or cut resistant materials, nothing is worse than trying to go like cut that and just chewing up the material and having like fray and like threads going everywhere. So I
Yep.
like with Sharpie, write on the scissors, like, these were I put these in makerspace August 24 or something. I'll write it on there, so that way I know, like, oh, these are kind of on the way out. I'm going to put these on the further machine, or these are going to become the paper scissors soon. And that way you're not using bad scissors on your really nice material.
Oh yeah, that's definitely different paper scissors. I've got another pair of like industrial shears that I use for like plastics and foams. So foams can really
Mm.
do a number on scissors as well. So like just a pair of really heavy duty like industrial scissors, I use those constantly, and just cutting through little frame sheets or strap foam and stuff. Yeah.
Let's talk about people who are limited on space, just to be mindful of those who might be sewing in a smaller studio or in those multi-use spaces. But let's say someone needs to fit all of their tools in kind of a small pouch. What would you be putting in there?
Yeah, I mean, really, when you think about it, it's like you can get by with a pair of scissors. You can get by with, a white pencil and a pen. A lighter is definitely something that you should have if you're working with webbings and stuff. And I mean, really, you can get a lot done with that. You could throw a few little clips in there for clipping stuff together if you need to. But you can go pretty Spartan if you don't have a lot of space. If everything needs to go, in the little area in your sewing machine, where there's nothing there. If you need to shove everything in there, it's like you can do a lot with just scissors, a lighter, pen and pencil, some seam ripper or something like that. Like it definitely, it's like some of the stuff, the weird rulers and stuff like that. It's like that's a luxury. It's not a need. I mean, some of that stuff becomes more necessary as you're increasing your production, and then usually you'd have more space anyway. So, but yeah, you can go very Spartan and make some pretty incredible stuff.
Nice. I have a personal question or a personal preference that I'm curious about. Thread snips are seem to be one of those really personal choices on what type of thread snips that you're using. So, what are you using? Do you have a particular preference?
Yeah, I used deceived scissors for the longest time, and now we have the little ones that you kind of push inwards,
Yeah.
and we bought like a 30 pack of them. They're everywhere, which is awesome. And I absolutely hated them. I hated them. I was like, this is the worst motion. Who made this? Like, we need to find this person, punish them. Um, but now I can't like, it's really hard for me to go back to scissors now because I just got in the habit. Like, they are so fast. And I glued a magnet onto so on the side of my sewing machine that I use the most, I glued a magnet onto the back of a lighter. It's right there. And then I have a magnet that's right there, and my little snips are right there. So they're all just, there's nothing on the sewing table at all. It's all just, right there. But those little snips they're amazing. They're not as good for the cleanup work. If I'm making stuff for myself, they're fine. when I was making stuff that was being sent out to customers, you usually have to come in there with something a little bit more precise. The brand Kai, they make incredible scissors worth every penny. They have some tiny little thread snipping scissors, and they're great for that detail work.
I want to check those Kai out now, because that's kind of the one thing that annoys me most. Similarly, I don't send stuff out to people. Like, I don't sell any of my stuff. But when I'm making something, I'm going to give somebody as a gift. Like, I really want to clean up where the auto cut was and whatnot, and get those things and get those tighter. And yeah, sometimes I want to get like really fine. Like, no, like that thread it's just sticking out too much. Like, I want it to be cleaner. um, so yeah, like that fine work it's one of those fine details, but it's important.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. You should check the Kais out. They're a little bit. I mean, I use Gingers for 10 years. I mean, I have a tattoo of the Ginger on there, but like these, they're just like, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's the problem. You're never going to go back.
Yeah,
So
that's fair.
you'll have them with you like all the time. And if they get nicked, it's like one of the worst things ever, but they're worth it. They're amazing.
All right, so we've covered a lot of the basics here, but there are a few kind of miscellaneous things that I think are really make the making experience better. And I kind of just titled this category miscellaneous, but this is like the entertainment, the unsung heroes, and things like that. So for you, your shop, again, kind of at home at Priority, what are some of those unsung heroes for you that really make the making experience that much better?
Yeah, I mean, for me, definitely having access to components and materials right at hand, like I don't have to source things. So an awesome thing to do is, if you're buying material for a project, if you can afford it, get an extra half yard. Or, if you're on your site looking for something to make an ultralight backpack with, stop by the sale section of the site and see if there's anything that's a good deal. It's like you're going to save. It's the same on shipping, right? And over time, you're going to slowly build up a nice little library of some materials, some hardware. Where maybe you have some Velcro and you have a little bit of webbing, because there's just times when you just like have this idea and like, oh, that would be perfect. I'm going on this trip this weekend, and being able just to go pull out your sewing machine and make something. That to me makes the process way more fun, way more organic and creative, is just having a little bit of on hand stuff. And I mean, you can ask any of my friends or my wife, it's like anytime, if we're like throwing something away or even previous projects that didn't work out, it's like I'm harvesting stuff off those all the time. I'm cutting out zipper slides and I'm cutting off buckles and like little lengths of webbing. And it's like I have a couple of these bins that are just like random hardware that I just got from I don't even know where. Because you never know. You're like, oh, I do need a 4-inch side release buckle. I don't know. It's this huge, like you
Yeah.
just never know. That to me is huge. And then like, if I can, I always try and avoid like putting my machine directly up against the wall. It's just depressing. Just to, like, it's like you feel kind of sealed off. So it's a lot of times it's even just like turning your machine 180 degrees. So you're facing out, you know, it's just a little bit nicer.
I feel seen by you, Dan, because it was just last week that I was like down in the warehouse and I asked Tim, our operations manager guy now, I was like, "Hey, that's really nice plastic and foam from this freight shipment. Can I take that?" He was like, "It's trash." I was like, "No, it's gonna be turned into something."
Oh
So
yeah, dude. That's like, and I mean, there are places like all over, production place. There's a place close to us, and they make like rolling cases, like custom rolling cases,
yeah,
and they have this huge like dumpster full of foams and plastics. And I was in
yes.
there talking about something, I can't remember what it was, and I was like, "What are you doing with that?" And they were like, "Oh, we just throw it away." I was like, "Do you care if I like back my car up here and just
Can I
like take a
dumpster
bunch of
that?
stuff?" But if you're around a place that has any type of like production sewing facility, even if it's not the type of stuff that you make, they almost always have more scraps than they know what to do with, and they're trying to figure out ways to get rid of them. So just calling up and be like, "Hey, can I just like pop in if you have a bunch of material and just grab some stuff?" I mean, it's super helpful to have like that kind of cheap or free material just on hand to try stuff with. Like, it is nerve wracking when you buy the exact amount of material that you need for a project and you're cutting into it and you haven't made your item before. You know, it's like that's huge. Just having like extra cheap material around that you can experiment with, that like any way you get that, whether you're, cutting hardware off of old bags or like grabbing foam from shipments or whatever that is. It's like, that's just one less barrier to getting in and making stuff.
Do you have any tips for balanced lighting or getting good lighting while you're sewing?
Yeah. Like when you're cutting and prepping, like more like ambient lighting is great. Um, Super directional lighting is really hard. It's hard to see if you're making the right marks and stuff. So yeah, usually a couple overhead lights from different sides on your cutting table is great. If you can get it, or next to a window is awesome. You get that natural light. But if you're making stuff at night, then it's not that great. But I mean, one of my favorite things, like having a little like ambient lighting on your sewing machine is great. But one of the kind of like articulating arm lamps is really good. And the reason that even if you have a small home machine that has a light in it, most of the time you're covering that light up with your hand or with a fold of material, then you can't see anything. With the articulating arms, you can put them exactly wherever you want. Like you think about when you're making bags, there's some steps that are weird where you're like inside of a bag and doing something, it's like, and being able to move that lamp around, to like shine from here or back here, or, that's huge. They provide enough light and they're not too harsh or direct.
If you're an outdoors person, then you definitely have a headlamp sitting around, and I would not be too prideful to throw a headlamp on there and do your sewing, if I'm honest, either.
No, that is a great tip right there. Because yeah, there are some times when you're like, I cannot see, especially if you do a lot of black on black sewing. It's like you just can't see
Yeah,
anything. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. All right, I think the last question. You mentioned listening to music earlier while sewing. I think entertainment's kind of an important piece of the making process and kind of getting into that flow state. What's your go-to, and like what would you bring into your shop? Do you put headphones on? Do you have a speaker? Do you watch TV shows? What do you do for just kind of when you're relaxing and sewing for fun?
I would say if you're in a space where there's multiple people, so let's say you have a friend helping you out, like try and like have the sewing machines face each other. We used to do this at our production facility. So instead of a line or all separated out, we would have them all facing each other, and you just get to hang out, and it's amazing. If I'm working by myself, yeah, it's usually like I have some headphones in, and I'm watching like I love cycling, so I'm usually watching some pro cycling or listen to a podcast or something, or music. I find it really hard to do it on speakers, because the machines are loud, so you miss stuff, and you can get away with that with music, but with like you know audiobooks or whatever, definitely having headphones in is great. I had wired headphones until like a year ago, and I always ran them under my shirt because I clipped so many headphones off. Like I can't tell you how many times that happened. So I'd always just run them under my shirt. Now I got these, and I'm like, I can't even believe, like, does anyone know about these? How awesome these are?
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about I hadn't thought about wired headphones actually. I was almost going to say the opposite, that for me I really like to kind of be able to hear the machine some, and I always get worried when I put a headphone on. I'm like, is this stitch running appropriately? Like start pulling
Yeah,
the ear back. But that is I guess I've only worn my AirPods to sew before, so I wasn't like
yeah.
I would have done that if I had wired headphones. I absolutely would have snipped them by now, though. That's for sure.
And it's so confusing too, because you're like, what happened? And you're like looking around, like, and it's just like this clipped wire, and you're like, oh, like,
That's awesome. Well, Dan, we had to skip our materials and components section a little bit, so maybe we'll have to do another episode where we come back to that and talk about what kind of materials people want to have on hand. But as always, this has been super fun. I hope the listeners, I
yeah,
hope you've gotten to take something from it. And yeah, thanks for joining us today.
yeah, no problem. It's awesome. I just love talking about it, and like anything that gets more people sewing and learning about sewing and kind of over that threshold of like, oh, I can actually do this. I'm all for that. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Well, by the trend of it, let's say we chat another 9 months or so.
All right, cool. See you guys.
Thanks, Dan.